Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us for the phone script training. It's going to be a little bit different from the phone script that we used for the primary in August. And you'll find this very interesting, and not only just for phoning, maybe for your own personal conversations as well. Phoning makes a difference though. And so we hope that you'll be able to do that. Help us out. We have 30,000 people to call, and the more people that get on the phone banking, the easier and faster the calls come in. We're calling people who rate high on the environment, are registered to vote, but do not vote regularly. But remember that no list is perfect. So sometimes you might hear something from someone that's like doesn't make sense. So just understand that that's possible too. Motivating climate concerned people to vote by first getting them to talk about the importance of good climate legislation, and then getting them to talk about their voting plans. So that's our idea here. And you won't have a lot of conversations. You're going to get a lot of hangups, but that's okay. The ones you do have will make a lot of impact and will also increase their climate support after the election. So that'll be really important. So really appreciate your getting involved in this. Sometimes it's hard to get that rejection, but once you get past that, it's actually kind of fun and it's worth it for the calls that are good. We are nonpartisan and no one should be advocating for or against any candidate or party. Just a reminder, I know we're all CCLers, but there's that. And now I'd like to turn it over to our expert consultant, Brandon Keating. Thanks again, Brandon, for helping us with this script.
Thanks so much, Jill. I am delighted to be here with you tonight, or whenever you might be watching this, if you're watching the recording. And thank you so much to everyone who's taking time to make these incredibly consequential phone calls. As Jill mentioned, phoning really makes a difference, and science actually says so. So Phoning has been studied with randomized controlled trials, which have shown that when we talk to voters over the phone, on average, we can increase the voter turnout by 3.3 percentage points. And now that might not sound like a lot, but when we think about the difference that a field campaign can make, it usually is a difference around the margins. And these are going to be, of course, nonpartisan calls, but increasing the number of people who are turning out is an incredible way to empower our climate concerned voters. So we actually have a special script that is likely to be able to create even more of an impact than that 3.3% bump that I just mentioned. Why is that? Number one, you have a very special role to play. Because you are a climate concerned person who can talk from a personal perspective about something that the voters on our list also care about. That's an immediate point of connection that we can then connect into voting. As Jill mentioned, and I want to underscore, the people that we're talking about are people that are very likely to have a high concern for the climate, but maybe a middling chance of voting. So you can be the difference that helps that climate concerned person go from somebody who votes once in a while to somebody who is definitely voting this time. So that's reason number one that these calls can be very powerful and maybe generate even more turnout than that average that I mentioned to you. Number two, this is not your average phone script. We have some special elements in here for you that have been tested to make even more of a difference than sort of a general phoning script, up to 5 to 10 percentage point difference. So every element of the script has been very carefully tested and placed in here because it can increase that difference of turning out sporadic voters as much as 5 or 10 percentage points, which is a very, very big deal. So what we're going to do to make sure that you are comfortable and excited to use this phoning script is we're going to go through it in 3 parts. first, we're going to go through the beginning portion of the script where we kind of introduce ourselves to the voter. We start to develop some rapport, and we try to make sure that they're actually going to stay in the call with us. So again, as Jill mentioned, yeah, when we're doing phoning, we get some hangups. That happens. We're not going to get to have a full conversation with every voter, excuse me, but we can actually reduce the total number of hangups by using that first part of the script to develop some rapport with the voter, and kind of help keep them motivated to stay in the call with us. And then the second part of the call is where we share stories with the voter. Now, why would we be sharing stories with voters? We're going to dig into that more when we get to that second section. But for some of you who maybe have heard of deep canvassing, one of the things that we know from deep canvassing is that when we share our stories back and forth, and when we have not just a one-way conversation, but a two-way conversation that promotes what social psychologists call active processing, so expending mental calories, we can have a lot more impact on a voter. Now, we are not doing a full deep canvas script in this situation, but we're just pulling in some special features to help increase the likelihood that these voters get out and vote. And then the third section of the script is where we use some more tested elements to really solidify the likelihood that person will go out and vote. And we'll go through what those tested elements are, where we kind of tie it all up in a bow and make sure that we have the greatest likelihood that the person will actually follow through on voting. So we're going to go ahead and start looking at the script and going through it in those three parts. So Jay, if you could share out your screen, thank you so much. Awesome. So the script just begins with a greeting. And here with this greeting, we want to make sure that we have ourselves in a frame of mind where we can sound really friendly. Having a smile on your face, even when you're on the phone, actually really helps with the friendliness in your voice. Believe it or not, people can hear that smile. So having a smile and, really being yourself, whether you are naturally a very outgoing, sort of friendly person, or you're a little bit more shy, being yourself so that you sound like you, like how you would talk to an old friend, is super helpful to keeping the voter in the call. And that's because people get calls from telemarketers, from folks who are just having very transactional conversations about the election, people who are asking for money, right? And a lot of those bill collectors, a lot of the time, those people sound very bureaucratic on the phone. And so sometimes we are tempted to try to sound very professional. But in doing that, we can end up sounding a little bit less friendly and a little bit more bureaucratic. So of course we want to be pleasant and polite and all of those things. And we want to kind of take that tone like we're talking to an old friend. And so we're going to say, hello, this is Brandon with Wisconsin Citizens Climate Education calling for Jill. Are they available? And then you want to let people know right away what you're calling about. And again, these are climate concerned voters. And this first sentence here, it's written the way it is. It's actually called identity framing, because it's one of those helpful elements for keeping people in the call and getting them out to vote. So when we're saying we're talking with Wisconsin voters like you who care about the environment, that's identity framing, because there's a lot at stake for our environment in the elections this year. And then we're using this rating scale as a way of opening the conversation. This rating scale is going to do two things for us. One, it's a really great tool for helping you as the caller express to the voter non-judgment. Why would that be important? The reason we want to express non-judgment to the voter is that we want them to be able to talk through any misgivings that they have about voting with us out loud. That's one of the things that can help change the behavior, that they talk through what's on both sides of whether they might vote or might not vote out loud with us. And so we need them to know that there's no right answer in the call, that we're not going to judge them, right? That it's not just the right answer to say, yes, I'm voting, but underneath they have all these misgivings, because we need to talk those misgivings through with them if we're going to solve them. So that's reason number one. The rating scale is a powerful tool for expressing non-judgment. Now, in this particular case, we are also, in case there are some people on our list who maybe aren't climate supporters for some reason, maybe they changed their mind, or maybe something, for some reason they snuck into the list. If they're a 1 or a 2, we are going to end the call with them there, because we're wanting to talk with climate concerned voters. But even if they're as low as a 3, we're going to still continue the call with them. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is it to you that our state and federal government support effective climate solutions? And so if somebody responds with the 3 to a 10, I'm going to in a very curious way, in a very non-judgmental way, say, why is that the right number for you? Why a 6 and not a 4 or a 10? And so here we want to really listen carefully to what they are saying. And we almost want to be little investigators here, where we're listening to the breadcrumbs of how we can kind of unpack their story a little bit and hear some values in it. So you might reflect back to them depending on what they say. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to scroll the script and I'm realizing you're sharing it, not me, Jay. Sorry, could you scroll up just slightly? So I was like, why isn't that working? So we want to listen really carefully as they're sharing, and a really helpful tool for careful listening in this part of the script is to repeat back to yourself, or try to summarize to yourself in your own head what they are saying while they are saying it. This helps keep us from focusing on thinking about what we're going to say next, and really focusing in on what they are saying. So you're going to try to summarize what they're saying to you in their head, and then you're going to say, oh, it sounds like you, and just kind of reflect it directly back to them, which is actually a great tool for helping people say more. You say sort of a little bit of a repeat back of what they said, and then they might build upon it a little bit. And so then you can also ask them directly, this magic little phrase, tell me more. Can you tell me a little bit more about something that seems important to them? And then we want to kind of reflect back to them in a way that can help you connect a little bit of your story in. And you can see an example here. I agree with you that being good stewards of both the environment and the economy is important. We should take care of what we love. And what we're really wanting to be listening for here is values. So for example, somebody might say, well, I think everybody should have clean air to breathe, and clean water to swim in and to drink. And you might say back to them, it sounds like you really care a lot about equality. I really care about that too. And here are some of the climate change things that are important to me. And you'll see in the example here, oh, and I'm going too far. Sorry, I got really excited and got ahead of myself. So I'm going to stop right here before we go into this story sharing piece, so that we can practice the beginning. So I'm going to say a little bit more about what we're trying to set up with this beginning piece related to the story, but then I'm going to pause and we're going to go through the story piece. So as we're doing that back and forth, right, we are sort of like little investigators, as I mentioned before, listening for these values. And what of our actual experience in our lives can we connect to the values that are underneath what the person has shared about their care and concern for climate change. So this is where we want to kind of get away from the facts and figures, not that we're deviating from them completely, but rather than communicating numbers or policy talking points, we want to communicate lived experiences that we've had and the feelings that that creates in us, and sort of bond with them a little bit about the climate concerns. So what we're doing in this first part is sort of investigating and seeing what we can connect on. And, you know, this is a lot like, these are skills that we all actually have. We just have to think about it a little bit when we're combining it with an intentional conversation with a stranger about voting. So we all have like met a new friend or colleague. You know, we all have maybe gone to a new school or a new workplace where we meet people and we have an exchange, and it goes a little deeper and a little deeper with each back and forth. That's what we're doing here. We're just doing it in a very intentional way with strangers. So I'm going to pause here for any questions from the group, and then we can do a little bit of a practice going from the beginning through the first rating and then a couple of these follow-up questions. So does anybody have any questions about this before we do that? Bill?
So Brandon, I'm wondering, as with the introductory statement, we're talking with Wisconsin voters like you who care about the environment because there's a lot at stake for our environment in the elections this year. What about asking, do you have a couple of minutes to discuss that or share your thoughts on that rather than jumping right in on a scale of 1 to 10? I mean, it gives people an excuse to bail out, but at least you're upfront and saying, this is going to take a couple of minutes. Would you be interested in sharing some thoughts, or do you have a couple of minutes to share thoughts?
So I have two answers to that. My first answer is that it's a totally natural instinct, right, to sort of ask that. And at that point in the conversation, they haven't gotten really enough about what the conversation is going to be and how it's going to be different than maybe a lot of people that call about issues or elections and voting. They haven't really gotten enough of that experience to respond to that, to maximize the response to that in a positive way. So I would suggest that you might keep more people in the call with you if you don't do that at that moment. However, there is a loophole. And like, personal style matters a lot, right? This is like what they used to say about Bill Clinton, who would break like every rule of presentations and things of that nature, and yet completely draw people in. What you are comfortable with is going to make everybody else more comfortable. So if you deeply feel that that is the best way to do it for you, and you have a style about that works for you, that's fantastic. You should do that. I would say for 9 out of 10 people, it's going to work better by not pausing to say, do you have a minute? But there's always that 10th person, and that 10th person could be you. So I'd say if you feel really tempted to try it that way, try it both ways and see which works better for you.
Thanks.
Of course. Any other questions? Oh, and welcome, Leah. I'm glad you're here. Any other questions before we practice? And I think, Jill, if we have let's see, if we have 4 breakout, maybe we do this in breakouts so that folks can practice at the same time. How does that sound?
Yeah,
And
we
then,
probably can do 2 breakout rooms with 2 each. Mhm.
great. So this is like zero pressure. This is just like practicing kicking the tires. And you're going to be yourselves in this conversation. This is a great one because you actually are climate supporters. So you can, you're just going to draw from your own experiences here in this first part. And just, we're going to do a few minutes, give you about 6 minutes in the breakouts, 7 minutes in the breakouts, so that, oh no, actually, let's make that, sorry, Jay, for my back and forth there. Let's make it 8 minutes in the breakouts so that each person can take about 3 minutes to go through this, you know, to be the canvasser, and then you can switch. So whomever was the canvasser switches and becomes the canvassee. And then you can each give each other a little bit of feedback. So like spending most of the time doing the canvas role play, but role playing as yourself. And then about 30 seconds to a minute giving each other feedback about how it worked for you as the canvassee. So you're just going to go from the beginning to where it says, actually, can you scroll down just a little bit, Jay? Okay. We are gonna get down to reflecting back to them what you heard. It sounds like you really care about X. So we're just gonna go that far and see how that works. And then we'll go through the transition part to the story when we do the next one. Okay?
Sounds good.
So if
All
I
right.
put the link in the chat, does everyone have the script open? Because when we go into breakout rooms, it's going to disappear.
I've got a printed copy.
Great.
Me too, I printed it, yep.
And then Jill, if I can't place you, so you go into room 1 and I'll go into room 2.
Okay, sounds
And
good.
should we pause the recording while we're doing this?
Good point. Yes, I can do that.
But before
There we go.
Sorry, Jill.
yeah, we're gonna go over the second part of the script, but before we do that, I would love to hear about everybody's experiences in the breakout. Like, what was it like to use the rating scale? Any light bulb moments? Any play like, oh, that worked well, or any places where you got stuck, or maybe something that your partner did was cool, or something that you did that was cool, or you know, effective, or that you were challenged by. So just some thoughts on what that was experience was like. Is there anyone who would like to share?
I'll share. It went pretty
Awesome.
quickly getting through the reflect back piece. I
Mhm.
think we were both done in like 90 seconds. It was interesting because Leah was a 10.
Yeah.
So I just adapted the question and say, oh, 10, great. Wow. Okay. So why is it a 10? Why not an 8 or a 6? So I just went 2 lower since there was obviously no number
Yep.
higher. And then the feedback that Leah gave me was that we're talking to Wisconsin voters line was a bit sing-songy. So I'm gonna practice that and pay attention to modulating my tone so it sounds a bit more natural.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and we didn't go over the tricky tens, but you absolutely took the right tactic, which is just to respond with non-judgment, and you know, why a 10 and not a 3 or a 7 or whichever. So that's great. And I say tricky tens because sometimes our inclination is not to be not to use non-judgment when it is a 10, because we want to be like high five. However, judgment, positive or negative, we want to avoid. So just kind of doing the internal yay, but outwardly you know, just really neutrally asking, oh, okay, you know, why a 10 and not a 3 or a 6 is really important, especially if when we get down to talking about voting, they are not so inclined. They'll be more comfortable to say that so that you get to talk about it if you were really non-judgmental with that top rating scale.
So I may have not actually been neutral enough in how I responded.
Yes.
I was actually gonna chime in and say I thought you did your response was actually good. Just like, oh, that's strong, and I didn't feel that was felt very neutral to me. Like I didn't feel like a yay behind it, and I didn't feel like a I don't know disappointment or something. Like it was just it felt very neutral when you said it.
Okay.
I'm so glad this came up because I did the exact wrong thing, didn't I, Bill? I was like, yeah, me too. So no, I get why you need to be non-judgmental, and I'm so glad this came up. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. We'll get we very soon, and in fact, in this section, we will get to share our yay and our passion, but we just got to establish that that non-judgment. Other reflections or things that you noticed in the breakout, things that were light bulb moments or challenges?
I got kind of, if you don't mind me speaking twice, I got what Bill was saying, you know, about like kind of easing into that first question. And I liked the I'm wondering too, or, you know, because I just felt like it's being really direct in the first thing on a scale of 1 to 10, you know what I mean? So, but it is really a personal preference and what you're comfortable with. So I'm glad that that's an option.
Yeah, I like the I'm wondering tweak. And you know, with any of these things, the core elements are there because they're well tested, but you can say them in your voice, meaning like the setup of I'm wondering is totally great. So that's a great tweak to make. Awesome. High five. All right. So I'm going to move now on to the midsection of the script. And so this is like a really meaty section where we are going to talk about climate a little bit more. We're going to share our stories in that regard. And then we're going to transition into talking about voting. So I'm curious just from the group, if anybody has a thought on why we would be digging into sort of sharing a bit of a personal story forward and back with the voter in this section here. Like why stories in this script? Does anybody have a thought on that?
Yes, that's an invitation to them to share a story.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan. Yeah, it's a social cue that it's okay to share at that level. Awesome. And Jay, I saw you were about to say something.
It just was a paraphrase of Susan.
Great minds think alike. Awesome. Yeah. So it turns out that 40 to 90% of decision making is based on emotion, not facts. So when we start sharing at the level of emotion, at the level of motivation, which is revealed in our stories, values, motivation, emotion, are all revealed if we're telling our organizing stories well. When we are able to connect at that level, we can tap in at the feeling level with the voter and connect those feelings to the act of voting, which is what we want to do. And, you know, again, not saying that we want to leave out the facts. However, a lot of times when we start with the head, as opposed to starting with the heart and the gut, we kind of lose people. We're not able to really get that behavior change. But when we start with the heart and the gut and then move to the head, it's much more successful. So in this section, remember, we're kind of trying to be a little bit of investigators, as I mentioned, to root out those values that might motivate this voter. And so we're going to ask for some details. That magic phrase, tell me more, like how often in life does somebody non-judgmentally, key caveat, non-judgmentally ask us to tell them more and listen, right? So that's what we're doing here, and it really helps keep people in the call and helps us get where we need to go with the conversation. So we're going to ask them, can you tell me more? It's also great here, if you're not like sure if you're quite hearing a value yet, to ask who, what, where, why, when questions, and how did that feel, right? So again, tapping into those feelings. Who, what, where, why, when is great, because that's how we talk in life in general, right? Like we don't sit like a speech and tell a giant story usually. We share a little bit of a tidbit, and then whoever we're speaking with says, oh, where was that? What happened next? Oh, how did that feel? Right? So that's kind of what we're going to do here in this tell me more section until we hear a value that that we can resonate with, that maybe we can share a little bit of a story that we have about. And it's also okay to guess here, right? Like it's great to say, oh, it sounds like you care about fairness, or it sounds like you care about truth telling, or it sounds like you care about community responsibility or family responsibility, right? You can guess a little bit, and that will keep the conversation going and deepening it. So, you don't have to feel like, oh, did I get it exactly right? It's okay. Most of these values actually are shared by many people. So if you think you've heard a hint of one, you're probably on the right path. And that's when we're going to share our own personal story. So you can see here, there's an example on the script. When I think about climate change, one of the things that comes up for me is I worry about my niece in California. I'm really close to her, and twice she's had to evacuate because of the severe wildfires they have out there now. Other times it's the smoke that is causing her problems. And last summer, I remember that there were times when I couldn't even stand to go outside here in Wisconsin because the air was so bad from the fires. And, I would even take that example and include some feeling words, and that made me feel really powerless, really scared, really whatever. Do you know anybody who's been affected by climate change, right? And so then you're going to hear a little bit more from them and reflect back those emotions and values that you're hearing. And so now that you've sort of established that you have this shared care and concern for the climate and some shared values, that's the point at which we're going to pivot to the election. And remember, these are folks who are not necessarily, well, I shouldn't say not necessarily, they're folks who are definitely not frequent voters, right? This particular list that you will be calling is comprised of people who don't vote in every election. So we're going to pivot to the election and say, you indicated that you think it's somewhat or very important to you the government supports strong climate action. One way we can influence the government is by voting. Are you planning to vote in the November election? So when you're thinking, and we're going to stop there when we practice this. When you're thinking about your story, you're thinking about what is part of your real lived experience that connects to climate change? And that could be something directly to do with climate change, like in this story, or it could be something that is, how you became the kind of person who cares about fairness, and then that connects into climate change. So either way is totally great. And it's just a little tidbit, right? It's just a little, you can see how short this one was. It's just a little tidbit. The key thing about it is that it includes your real lived experience, something that happened to you personally, that's in your life personally, not something that's a talking point or something that's about the policy, but something that's actually lived experience. You can connect it to the policy, but it needs to have that lived experience element. That's what makes it powerful. So I'm going to stop there and see if folks have any questions about how we do this section, how we put together our story.
I have one question.
Yeah.
when you said, if you think you heard one of their values, I had the thought to say, it sounds like that family is a really important value for you. Did I get that right?
That's perfect.
Okay.
That's perfect. Yeah. Love that. Yeah, that's exactly right. And the reason we're doing that in that manner is both because it gives us the opportunity to guess a little bit, and it gives them the opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into that values piece, right? People have a lot of muscle memory and observation online and in the media of talking about public policy issues in the abstract, in a way that's disconnected from our personal lives. So we want to connect that in and utilizing those values. And that phrase helps us to do that. So yeah, that's perfect, Jay. Awesome.
Mm.
All right. Any other questions before we jump into breakouts for story practice? All right.
How far are we
Um,
going? We're going just up to are we going to ask about whether they're going to vote, or do we stop just short of that?
Yeah, because I would love for you to practice that transition along with it. So you're going to start at the part where we're going to do a little overlap with where we were last time. So you're going to skip over the very opening part, but you're going to start with the person's response. So if I was one of the partners, if I was the person being canvassed, I would just say, you don't have to ask them their rating. I would just say, I'm a 3 or I'm a 10 or whatever the case may be. Probably a lot of 10s in here. But I just start with that number and then the follow-up question. And then we're going to go all the way through from the why is that the right number for you, all the way from there to the are you planning to vote? And so the reason why we're doing that whole sort of expansive midsection is so that you can kind of do the transitions in and out. And because you're getting the information of what story are you going to share starting right after that rating scale. That's where you're starting being a little investigator about what are the values that motivate this person. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, great. So let's do this with, let's see. Well, let me ask you this question. Jay and Jill, do you both, because what we should do is a breakout of 2 and a breakout of 3, unless Jay or Jill, you prefer not to be in a breakout, in which case we can just do 2 and 2. So that is up to you if you straining my. Hey, folks. Oh, there's Susan. Great. Oh, excuse me. All right, welcome back. Would love to hear about folks' experience in the same manner that we did last time. So any light bulb moments, anything that was tricky or hard, anything that went well, anything that your partner did that was notable, or yourself. Love to hear folks' experiences and reflections.
So I was a canvasser for Leah, and she expressed she gave rated herself a 5 on the importance of government action on climate, and pointed out that there are a host of other problems, including the problems in Springfield, Ohio, not far from her. And I thought that was great when she was. Yeah, so I was canvassing her, and when I had to come up with a personal story, I really didn't have a good personal story on climate or related to the immigration issue. It's not an issue up in far northern Wisconsin. So I felt I didn't do a good job of coming up with a personal story that I could give to Leah.
Well, maybe I didn't play fair. For everyone, I'm from Ohio. Introduced myself to my small group, but I'm sort of an interloper. I've been part of this chain for a few months, but yeah, so I might not have been playing fair to bring an issue that's not as pertinent to Wisconsin voters. So anyway, I thought you did a good job
Well,
of playing
I think it
along.
was fair enough. I just, I didn't have a good personal story to go with that.
So it's actually, that's a great practice thing. It might be a little bit of the advanced level that you brought us into, Leah, but it's actually a great thing because when we're picking what story do we share, it actually doesn't matter what issue that it's on. Like we want to bring it back to climate, but when we're listening for their values, if they bring in another issue, if they start talking, like, for example, if somebody were to say to me, um, you know, we can talk about climate change, but that's like, polar bears on ice caps. And every time I drive my car down the street, there's potholes in the street and my street never gets fixed. And on the other side of town, the streets are always fixed and always paved beautifully. And it's causing me repairs on my car. It's costing me a lot of money. I would say, it sounds to me like you care a lot about fairness. Can you tell me a time when that crystallized for you, or can you say more about that, right? And then when I were to, and so I would just keep drawing them out, right, about fairness. And then when I would go to share my story, I would then talk about why fairness is important to me and how that connects to climate change. So it doesn't matter if they start telling you about a bad day that they had at work. If you can hear the values underneath what they're saying, or at least find one, again, things like fairness, community responsibility, honesty, that's what you can attach your story to. So it's a little bit of a curveball for what we set you up for, but it's actually really good that that happened. And it's super easy, right, to get stuck, to feel like you need to mirror back exactly. It takes a little bit to work that muscle of, oh, I'm listening for that value that's underneath what they're telling me. So I'm so glad you brought that up, Bill, and I'm glad that you threw that curveball, Leah. I think that's fabulous and is really, really helpful to our learning about story. Awesome. Other not questions. Why did I just say that? I mean, if you have questions, you can ask them, but that's not what I meant to ask right now. I meant to ask other reflections on the story sharing.
I have a question.
Sure.
What curveball did Leah throw?
Well, I think based on the example that we gave in the script, Bill was expecting her to share a climate change story or share about her, like, more about climate change, and she brought in the new issue of immigration. So Bill was, if I'm got this correct, Bill was feeling like he needed to say something back about immigration, when in reality, we can just ask more questions and dig into the value that's underlying that. And that will
And then-
happen.
And
Mhm.
then do you try to circle back to climate?
Yep. And so whatever value that you hear and that you want to attach your story to, like, for example, if the value that you hear is fairness, you're going to talk about how that relates to your care and concern for climate change.
Oh, okay.
Awesome. Other thoughts about what that experience was like, sharing stories, things that came up, any little speed bumps? Do folks feel like you could do that on the phone with a voter? It's okay to say no.
I really like that.
So, what I responded to Leah was, I understood the concerns about immigration, and I think Leah's concern was, how the Haitians in Springfield are being treated, and providing adequate resources to deal with them. I did say that I saw a connection between immigration and climate change, and with more severe climate change, the problem is going to be worse. I mean, we can expect much larger
Yep, that's
immigration.
right.
At that point, I didn't really feel a need to provide my own story. It seemed to me I was at a point where I could, we discussed this concern and I could just go to, this is an important issue that needs to be addressed, providing adequate services, dealing with climate change. How are you gonna vote in the election to elect politicians to deal with this?
So I think the thing that I would love for all of us to challenge ourselves to do, this is like a little bit of a different conversation than normal conversations, right? Sometimes. So we do have these skills that we use in our lives. We don't always use them in a conversation with a stranger that's about voting. But the thing to kind of challenge ourselves to do is, can we make sure that we're talking about our own lived experiences? And drawing, like Lisa, for example, Leah, for example, towards how her lived experience relates to her care and concern about what's happening with the Haitian people in that area, right? Because we want to be talking about our own real lived experience to get the maximum effect. Now, I will say, Bill, I think if you had done as you described, it would have been an effective canvas, because you are connecting something that she cares about to the climate. However, or not however, and this is like a tweak to bring it just to that next level. It's like from A to A plus. And this is like a specific kind of script that we're trying to use. So I think you would still get benefit from the manner in which you responded, and we can practice even going to that level deeper of real lived experience with emotional weight. Awesome. All right. We are going to go ahead and move to the third section of the script. And this is like the nuts and bolts section, right? If you've done voter canvassing before, a lot of this is probably going to look really familiar. And again, all of these pieces are here for a reason. They're here because they've been tested to be effective. So we're going to ask, are you planning to vote in the November election? And then we're going to get a response. And when you do this on the system that you'll be using, on the dialer system, you will automatically, when you code, thanks, Leah, take care, thanks for being with us. When you code the voting response, you'll automatically go to the right set of answers. But because we're on a Word document here, or a Google document, we're going to just kind of scroll through the whole thing. Okay, so if the person says yes, then that's fantastic, right? Our inclination might be to be like, okay, great, thank you, bye. But the reason that we're continuing on in the script is, again, because these are all infrequent, sporadic voters that do not vote every time. And so we want to do a few things to make sure that that intent of voting turns into the action of voting, right? So like, I intend many times to go for a walk or go to yoga, and I end up many times on my couch with a snack, right? We intend to do a lot of things that we don't always follow through on, and voting is exactly the same way. Or like sometimes on Wednesday, it seems really good to do that that social event on Friday night. And then Friday night comes and it's like PJs seem like a better idea. So same thing with voting. So we're going to go through these questions because they're tested to solidify that commitment. So first question is, do you plan to vote in person, absentee by mail, or early at the clerk's office? And so what we're doing is we're bringing them through planning questions about how and when and where they're going to vote, because that has been shown to increase voter turnout. And then excuse me, I just got lost on the script. And then we're going to let them know when the polls are open and close if it's in person. And we're also going to let them know, and this is sort of a little bit of an education portion, that they can visit myvote.wi.gov for information about their polling place, so that they know where to go. And we're going to ask them if we can text them a reminder the day before the election. And the reason we're asking that is because when we're able to get people's commitment to vote, take down their information and remind them, that also increases voter turnout. So it's the combination of the commitment and the reminder of their commitment. And so we're going to make sure that we have their correct cell number. And if it's the absentee or clerk's office, then we're going to ask them, do they have any questions about voting that way? And if they do, that they can go to myvote.wi.gov. And then this part is there for a reason as well. So talking with you is a part of our statewide campaign to increase voter participation in Wisconsin. We believe that when more people vote, government is more fully representative of the people. So thank you for your commitment to voting. So we're reinforcing that commitment, and then we're politely bidding them good evening. Thank you for participating and have a good evening. Okay, could we scroll so the voting response maybe is at the top? Perfect. So here we begin with lots of people in your area are planning to vote, and I would love to understand a little better why you aren't sure. Would you tell me a little more about that? So we want to be really non-judgmental in our tone here, as we have been throughout. And the reason we include lots of people in your area are planning to vote is because for people with less voter turnout history, the sort of bandwagon effect is really helpful. So sometimes we're tempted to say, few people are voting, so we need you to go out and vote, right? Because that's how we as activists tend to be motivated, right? As activists, we are like, if it's not happening, we need to go do it and get other people to do it. However, we are a little bit weird. And for the general public, and specifically sporadic voters, it's more people are voting. Your neighbors are doing it. Everybody's doing it. It's easy. It's fun. That's kind of like the vibe that we want to convey. And so we're asking into that and then reflecting back to them again. And if their hesitation has to do with voting logistics, we want to clarify the problem and go over to the frequently asked questions to provide information. If their hesitation has to do with frustration with the government or politics, then we want to acknowledge that, right? So a lot of people don't participate because they feel like the system isn't working for them. There are a lot of colorful phrases that we could use to describe what they might be thinking about government right now. If that's the case, we want to acknowledge, it sounds like you feel pretty frustrated, and I feel that way sometimes too. And then you can briefly share a positive story that you might have about engaging with government or seeing it make a difference. So there's an example here. So it sounds like you feel pretty frustrated. I feel like that sometimes too, but I've actually had a chance to talk to my representative and their staff, and I found out they're pretty much people just like the rest of us. I was even able to get them to support a climate bill that mattered to me. And then you might ask them, do you know of someone who is able to get a problem solved in their school or town or government? And you also can choose another pathway. So that is an example of how you can sort of bring them from frustration to action. You also might have another reason than the one that's written here, that when there's frustration with government, you vote anyway, right? So if you want to, if that's not the most resonant thing for you, you can choose something that's more resonant to say, well, I get frustrated with government sometimes too, but I think it's really important, or it's really important for me personally to vote anyway, because that actually is my voice, and I'm only going to be able to make a difference if I keep using it, or whatever's true for you, right? So just letting you know this is an example here, and that you might have a different example that doesn't have directly to do with making a difference in government, which is not an experience that every single person has had. Okay, and then the remainder of this portion very much is similar to the yes. Leading into it, we have the information in case you decide to vote. The election is November 5th. Polls are open. Here's where you can go for information. Do you have any questions about voting? And here we can use the frequently asked questions sheet to help answer them. And then asking them if you were to vote. So we're giving them the planning questions, even though they haven't given a commitment necessarily. But if you were to vote, do you think you'd vote in person, by absentee, or at the clerk's office early? And then acknowledging their response and going through with the exact same pieces then from here to the end as in the yes response. And let's then move over to the no response. Okay. So here with the no response, we're going to open the same way as the maybe. We're going to go into acknowledging the specific frustrations. And then we just have some little tweaks where we're saying, in case you decide later to vote, here's the information. November 5th, polls are open 7 to 8. Go to myvote.wi.gov for more information. So that is the last third of the script. It's very nuts and bolts, depending upon which pathway you go through. And the thing to think about is those maybes, and thinking about, you know, I think we've all probably had a moment at one time or another that we were frustrated with government, right? So thinking about, why is it that you not only participate anyway, but you also encourage others to participate anyway? So we're going to do a real quick 6-minute breakout here just to practice that. So we're going to do like 3 minutes and 3 minutes about, or actually like 2.5 and 2.5, so you can give each other feedback, about why, when you're frustrated with government, do you still vote anyway? And if you have time, you can connect it to the other pieces that attach to it. But I want to make sure that mainly folks get a chance to kind of share, you know, as if you just got a maybe. I get frustrated with government sometimes too. Here's why I participate anyway. So Jay, would you just pop up some real quick breakouts so that folks can. So we are just rapidly approaching the bottom of the hour here. And oops, are we missing 2 humans? Or 1 human?
Susan didn't
Yeah,
come
I
back.
think Leah's gone. Maybe she signed out instead of left the break room. Sometimes that happens. You click the wrong button.
She's stuck in the breakout room. Oh, wait.
Oh,
No, she's not. I'm not sure where she is.
Okay, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure if like she was just in the electronic in between to wait a second.
She's
But
stuck in limbo.
but so we have the FAQ document for you that was in the calendar invitation to this, and I think you may have received it in email as well. And that's going to be a great resource for you when you are making the calls. The one thing you're going to want to remember is to either print it out or keep it open in a tab on your computer, because it's not part of the script that you'll see in the dialer. So just make sure when you go to start your phone bank, either have it open in another tab on your computer or have it paper copy printed out, depending on what you like to do. Or you could put it on your, look at it on your phone as well, whatever works for you, on a separate, if you're not dialing on that phone, obviously. And then the other key thing to pull out from the FAQ to call your attention to is that myvote.wi.gov is the place to go for all voting questions. So 100% of voting logistics questions that you get, where is my polling place, all that good stuff. It's a one-stop shop for all of those answers. And then the last thing to flag from the FAQ is that there is one constitutional amendment on the ballot concerning citizenship. And CCL does not have a position on it since it has no connection with the climate. The League of Women Voters opposes it, and people can get information at the League of Women Voters website. So you can read the FAQ about that to them if they do ask about that. So with that, since it's the bottom of the hour, I do want to set everybody free. But if you have any questions that pop up, and yeah, go ahead, Jill, with whatever you need to do. And just letting you know that you can route questions through Jill or Madeline or whomever your point of contact is at CCL if questions come up about the script.
Yes, thank you. Yep. So thank you so much, Brandon. That was amazing. And I learned a lot. So it was great. I want to just remind everybody that phone banking starts next Thursday. And we're going to be phone banking every Thursday night from 6 to 7:45. Training is provided in the beginning of every session in case you need it. And then the last 15 minutes from 7:30 to 7:45, we'll just be talking about our experience and sharing about that. And I just put something in the Zoom link, which is the blog post about that, listing all the dates and the Zoom link for that. It is also in cclwi.org calendar. So each of those dates, and the Zoom link's always the same. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So nice to be with you.
Everyone.
Thanks for all your.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thanks, Jill.
Brandon.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, Jill.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Jay. Thank you, Jay, so much for doing the IT.
You
Yeah.
bet.
Okay.
Is somebody doing Action Tracker?